Keanu Reeves opened the weathered envelope with shaking hands. His childhood nanny, Lucia, was gone, but what she left in her will couldn't be mailed, couldn't be explained. He had to travel deep into Mexico to receive it. What he found inside a locked wooden chest shattered everything he thought he knew about love, memory, and himself. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The knock on the gate was so soft, Keanu almost missed it. He had just finished a quiet morning walk in the hills behind his Los Angeles home. The sky still streaked with early light. His dog was at his side, ears perked. When Keanu opened the door, a young courier stood on the other side, holding a padded envelope against his chest like it might break. He didn't speak at first, just looked up, eyes nervous, as if he wasn't sure he should be the one delivering this. Keanu nodded gently, trying to ease the silence. The courier swallowed hard and extended the envelope with both hands. No clipboard, no signature. Just one envelope and a short sentence. She said you had to get this by hand. Keanu took it slowly. The paper was heavy and old-fashioned, the kind people barely used anymore. The return address wasn't typed. It was written in delicate, slanted cursive. He read the name once, then again. It didn't make sense. Lucia Alvarez. His heart stuttered. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. Lucia. He hadn't spoken her name out loud in over a year. Not because he'd forgotten her, he never could, but because it was painful to remember how far he'd let time stretch between them. She had been his nanny when he was just a boy, but more than that, she was the woman who tucked him in at night, who kissed his forehead when he was sick, who held his hand through the darkest moments of his childhood. His mother had hired her, but she became something more. A second mother, a guardian, a soul anchor. And now her name was written on this envelope. The ink had faded slightly at the edges. There was a second line beneath her name, a location, Michoacan, Mexico. Then, at the top corner, a small black stamp that said, deceased. Keanu's fingers tensed around the paper. The courier lingered awkwardly for another second, then stepped back. Keanu thanked him softly, watching the young man disappear down the driveway without another word. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. He held it for a while without opening it, just standing barefoot on the tile floor of his entryway, staring at the name written in that elegant, familiar hand. He didn't know she had died. No call, no letter, no message from anyone in her family. He whispered her name under his breath, and it almost didn't sound real. Lucia had always seemed timeless. Gentle, yes, but unshakable. Her laughter used to fill whatever room she entered. And now she was gone? He stepped into the kitchen, placed the envelope carefully on the table, and sat down. The room was silent, but his mind was loud. Memories were starting to crawl back. Her voice, her cooking, the way she'd hum while folding his shirts, always with that rhythm like an old lullaby. He reached for the envelope again, then paused. A tremor moved through his hand. Then he opened it. Inside the envelope was a folded letter on cream-colored stationery, the kind lawyers still used. The letterhead read, Abogados Hernandez y Ruiz, with an address in Uruapan, Michoacan. Keanu's eyes scanned the document, but his focus kept slipping. The words blurred. It wasn't until he reached the third line that the message landed. Lucia Alvarez had passed away the week prior, peacefully, in her sleep, age 89. His chest hollowed out. He sank back into the kitchen chair, fingers curling tightly around the paper. For several moments, he just sat there. Then he read the rest. The letter explained that Lucia's final will included a request one made with great care and intention. She had left something behind for Keanu, something that could not be shipped, faxed, emailed, or transferred. It had to be given to him in person, no one else. The letter made that point twice. He was to come, alone if possible, to collect it directly from her attorney. There was no explanation about what it was, only that she'd been preparing it for many years. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, both hands gripping the letter like it might float away. For a long time, he didn't move. The morning light shifted across the tiled floor, but inside him, time had stalled. He had promised to call her last Christmas. He remembered the thought clearly standing on set, looking at his phone, telling himself he'd reach out when the shoot wrapped. But the days passed, then months, then silence. He had sent her a birthday card, yes, and flowers, on Mother's Day, but he hadn't heard her voice in nearly 15 months. Now he never would again. His throat burned. The letter ended with a sentence that hit like a whispered echo from the past. She said you'd understand once you saw it, and that you would come. He folded the letter carefully and stared out the kitchen window. The hills outside were golden and quiet. A hummingbird flitted by, hovering near the rosemary bush she used to love when she visited Los Angeles years ago. She had smiled at it and told him in Spanish that hummingbirds carry messages from the departed. He closed his eyes. It didn't feel real. Lucia was part of a chapter he had never wanted to close. She had always existed in the background of his life, steady, present, patient. The kind of love that asked for nothing, but gave everything. And now, she was gone. But she had left something behind. He didn't know what. He only knew that it mattered enough that she refused to let it be mailed. It had to be him, and it had to be now. He reached for his phone and whispered, "Book me a flight to Michoacan." Keanu stood up slowly, the letter still in his hand, and walked toward the living room. The house felt strangely unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves knew something had shifted. He paused near the bookshelf where he kept mementos from different stages of his life. Awards, photographs, small gifts from fans, handwritten notes from directors. But it was one simple object that drew his eye now. A faded Polaroid of him, at 10 years old, perched on Lucia's lap in a Toronto apartment. She was smiling at the camera, her dark hair pulled back under a patterned headscarf. Her arms wrapped around him with that warmth he never forgot. He remembered the day clearly. He had been upset about something, a fight at school, a teacher who didn't understand him, and she had convinced him to take a picture so they could capture a happy moment to replace a sad one. Her words had always been gentle, always steady. He touched the edge of the frame now and felt the weight of every year that had passed since. He wondered how long she had been preparing this final gift. The letter said many years, decades maybe. Had she been thinking of him while he was filming in some distant country? While he was learning lines, or riding his motorcycle, or trying to navigate life after devastating losses? The thought tightened his throat. She had been watching over him silently, even when he had drifted farther and farther away. He walked into the hallway and reached for his travel bag. The decision wasn't something he had to debate. If she asked him to come, he would come. He owed her that much. He owed her so much more. As he placed the letter carefully inside the front pocket of his bag, he felt something unexpected nervousness. The kind a child feels when returning home after being gone too long. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Heaviness filled him. But beneath it was something else. A pull. A calling back to a part of his life he had set aside but never truly forgotten. He thought of her last days. Was she alone? Did she think of him? Did she wait for his call? The questions pierced deeper than he expected. He stood again, steadier this time. Lucia had left him something important, something she believed only he could understand. Whatever waited for him in that small Mexican town, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was going. The drive to LAX was quiet, but Keanu's mind wasn't. As the city drifted past the car windows, memories he had locked away for decades began surfacing without warning. They came slowly at first, like faint ripples across still water, then clearer, sharper, more insistent. By the time he reached the airport gate, he could no longer push them aside. He saw himself at 3 years old, standing barefoot in a cramped Toronto apartment. His father was already gone by then, lost to addiction and disappearing promises. His mother was working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, chasing stability that never seemed within reach. The apartment echoed with loneliness. The air felt heavy, full of the kind of silence a child doesn't know how to describe but always feels. And then Lucia arrived. She stepped into their home with a soft smile, a worn suitcase, and a gentle voice that carried the melody of another country. She smelled faintly of warm tortillas and lavender soap. Keanu remembered staring up at her the first time they met, studying her round face, her deep brown eyes, and the way she crouched down to greet him as if he were the most important person she had ever seen. He didn't know then how much she would change him. He didn't know she would become the anchor of his chaotic world. Lucia began caring for him the very same day. His mother had been called into work unexpectedly, and there was no one else. She handed Keanu over to Lucia with an anxious apology, already rushing out the door. Lucia simply nodded, her hands steady, her presence calm. She picked him up as though she had always known him and whispered in soft Spanish, "Mi niño, you are safe." Keanu had not understood the words, but he felt them. She carried him into the small kitchen and set him on the counter. She talked to him while preparing lunch, mixing Spanish and English, humming in between sentences. Her voice was warm, her tone patient. She didn't rush, didn't sigh with frustration, didn't treat him like a burden. She treated him like a child deserving of tenderness. For the first time in a long time, the apartment didn't feel empty. He remembered the night terrors that started soon after his father left. He would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, crying, without understanding why. His mother tried her best, but exhaustion always won. She was barely keeping the family afloat. But Lucia never hesitated. It didn't matter what time it was. She would enter his room quietly, sit beside him, and stroke his hair until his breathing slowed. Sometimes she whispered old Mexican prayers, her voice steady as a slow dancing heartbeat. Sometimes she hummed lullabies passed down from her own mother. When morning came, she made him hot chocolate the way she liked it, sprinkled with cinnamon, and told him he had been brave. He didn't feel brave, but he believed her. Lucia had a way of making him believe things about himself he couldn't see yet. And in those early years, she became much more than a nanny. She became home. As Keanu grew older, the apartment seemed to shrink around him. Bills piled on the kitchen counter. His mother worked late into the night, sometimes sleeping in her clothes because she was too tired to change. He remembered feeling like the world was always shifting under his feet. Yet whenever Lucia was near, the ground steadied again. She brought a quiet order to the chaos. She woke him gently each morning, with the smell of warm tortillas or eggs simmering in a small pan. She tied his shoes patiently, guiding his small hands so he could learn to do it by himself. Sometimes he cried in frustration when the laces slipped apart. She never raised her voice. She simply knelt in front of him, looked him in the eyes, and told him he could try again when he was ready. He always was. On cold Toronto mornings, she wrapped him in a thick knitted scarf she had made herself. The yarn was a deep red, the color of the Mexican sunsets she missed. She told him stories about her childhood, about heat and mountains and mango trees, and Keanu listened as if she were describing another universe. Her memories were like blankets that wrapped around him, giving him warmth even when the world outside felt unforgiving. He began calling her Lulu before he could pronounce her full name. She laughed the first time he said it, a sound like soft bells shaking loose from grief. After that, the nickname stayed. Everyone else still called her Lucia, but for Keanu, she was Lulu, the person who always seemed to know what he needed before he knew it himself. When he scraped his knee running down the hallway, it was Lucia who bandaged it. She dabbed the wound gently, blowing on it so it wouldn't sting, whispering, "Valiente, mi niño, you're stronger than you think." He believed her, even though he cried anyway. Her belief was a kind of courage. The nights were the hardest. His father's absence was like a shadow that stretched across the apartment. Lucia saw it, even when he didn't speak. She noticed when he stared too long at the front door, waiting for footsteps that never came. She noticed when he sat alone on the floor, legs pulled to his chest. She didn't ask questions he didn't know how to answer. She simply sat beside him until he leaned into her. She smelled like warm corn and jasmine. That smell made him feel safe. There were days he didn't want to go to school. Children could be cruel, especially to the quiet ones. Lucia would kneel down, take his small face in her hands, and tell him something in Spanish that he didn't understand back then but understands now. She told him he had a gentle heart, that gentle hearts shine in dark places. She told him the world needed people like him. Her words stayed with him long after she spoke them. And even at that age, he knew she wasn't there just to do a job. She was there because she loved him, in a quiet, unconditional way that asked for nothing in return. As the years passed, Lucia became the one stable thread woven through every chapter of Keanu's early life. When his mother worked late or came home exhausted, it was Lucia who tucked him into bed. She smoothed the blankets around him and sang those soft Mexican lullabies that floated like warm light through the dark. He didn't know the words then, but he knew the feeling: safety, comfort, love. She taught him how to make simple meals, guiding his hands as he shaped dough or stirred batter. She cheered when he learned how to crack an egg without breaking the yolk. She clapped when he recited his first lines for a school play, even though he whispered them shyly and forgot half the words. To her, he was brilliant, even before he believed in himself. Sometimes, when the world felt heavy, she sat with him on the floor near the heater, both of them wrapped in that red scarf she knitted. She told him stories from her village in Mexico, about festivals lit by lanterns, about the laughter of her brothers, about singing in the kitchen with her own mother. Her memories painted pictures he clung to, colors brighter than anything he felt at home. And when nightmares returned, she was there again, whispering prayers in Spanish as she held him against her chest. Her voice was steady, calming the storm inside him. Those were the moments that shaped him. Moments he didn't understand fully until adulthood. She wasn't just filling the role of a nanny. She was filling the space a father had left behind. She was filling the silence his mother never meant to create. She was giving him the peace of childhood he might never have known. And without realizing it, she became the first person he ever trusted completely. Keanu often wondered, especially as he grew older, how Lucia found the strength to give so much without ever asking for anything in return. Her devotion was never loud. It was never dramatic. It simply lived in the quiet corners of his life, woven into moments most people would forget. But he now clung to like threads of a story he hadn't understood until long after it was written. He remembered the move from Beirut to Toronto, a transition far too heavy for a child to grasp. His family was leaving behind instability, confusion, and a marriage falling apart. The flights were long, the airports loud, and the world suddenly felt too big. Yet the moment they stepped into that cold Canadian air, there she was, stepping out of the taxi behind them, carrying 2 suitcases and wearing the same patterned scarf she always wore on travel days. She had followed them across continents, crossing borders she had never imagined, simply because he needed her. She had left behind her own roots. Without hesitation, her siblings stayed in Mexico. Her aging parents stayed in the house she grew up in. She left everything familiar, stepping into a life that offered her no promises, no family of her own to lean on. Keanu didn't understand the sacrifice as a child. He only understood that she arrived every morning and stayed until night, like the steady turning of a clock. When he fell sick with a flu during their first winter in Toronto, she never left his side. She sat on the floor beside his bed, her back against the wall, legs crossed, humming quietly while pressing cool cloths against his forehead. His mother checked in when she could, but it was Lucia who stayed. It was Lucia who held his hand through fever spikes and shivers. She whispered gentle Spanish phrases that calmed him, and even though he didn't understand the language, the tone was enough to soften the ache. He remembered waking up once in the middle of the night, seeing her asleep in the chair beside him, her head tilted, her hands still resting on the blanket covering him. He thought then that she looked like the guardian angels people talked about in stories. He didn't say it, of course. He didn't have the words, but the feeling stayed. As he grew older, dreams began forming in his mind. Dreams of acting, of performing, of stepping into stories bigger than life. He was shy at first, practicing lines alone in the hallway where the acoustics made him sound braver. But he wasn't alone for long. Lucia found him one evening reciting lines under his breath and asked what he was doing. When he told her, she didn't laugh or brush it off. She sat down on the floor beside him and asked him to start from the beginning. And he did. Slowly, hesitantly. Then, with growing confidence, she held the script with both hands, reading opposite him, stumbling through English words she didn't fully understand. But she tried anyway, for him. When he finally got through the scene, she clapped with both hands, her eyes shining with a pride that made his ears warm. He didn't know then how much that moment would shape him. All he knew was that someone believed in his dream long before it made sense to believe in it at all. Lucia's support never faded as Keanu moved through childhood into adolescence. If anything, it grew deeper, woven into moments he didn't realize were shaping him until many years later. She understood him in a way few people did. She recognized his quietness, not as shyness, but as depth. She saw the way he observed people, the way he studied expressions, gestures, the rhythm of emotions. Where others might have misunderstood him, she saw the early signs of an artist. When he practiced monologues from plays he barely understood, Lucia sat cross-legged on the carpet, listening as if he were performing on a stage. On the days when his confidence faltered, and he would hide the script behind a pillow, she encouraged him gently. She told him, in slow, careful English, that voices like his were meant to be heard. She told him he had something rare, something the world needed even if it didn't know it yet. She helped him rehearse for a school play once, reading the lines of 3 different characters because no one else was available. He remembered her mispronouncing a long English word and laughing so hard she snorted, and he laughed with her until his stomach hurt. That night, when he finally performed on stage, she sat in the audience beside his mother, her hands clasped tightly, whispering prayers for him, for courage, for clarity, for the moment to shine through him. That quiet devotion continued even after he landed his first small acting gig. It was just a commercial 30 seconds long, barely memorable, the kind of opportunity most people brushed past, but for him, it felt enormous. And for Lucia, it was enough to celebrate, like he had won an award. She didn't throw a party or shout from rooftops. That wasn't her way. Instead, she created something small, something homemade, something that meant more to him than any trophy could have. When he returned home after filming, she pretended nothing was different. She cooked dinner the same way she always did, humming softly in the kitchen. But later that night, when he walked into his room, he found it on his dresser, a paper star, cut by hand, with little uneven edges, decorated in bright yellow marker, and written in careful block letters across the center were 2 words in Spanish: Eres brillante. You are brilliant. He picked it up gently, running his thumb across the ink. Lucia had always been thoughtful, but this was something different. This was her way of telling him that she saw him, truly saw him. She believed in him, Not because he was succeeding, but because he was trying. Because he was brave enough to dream. He kept that star for years. Even after he moved out, after fame found him, after the world began calling his name, he carried it. In a shoebox filled with the few childhood items he couldn't bear to lose. He kept it, because every time he looked at it, he heard her voice again, soft and certain. You shine, mi niño, even when you can't see it. As he stepped deeper into his teenage years, Lucia's devotion became a kind of steady light that guided him through storms he wasn't ready to face. When insecurity crept in, she recognized it before he spoke. She saw the way he compared himself to others, the way he feared disappointing people, the way silence sometimes wrapped around him like a heavy coat. She countered that silence with small gestures that spoke louder than any long conversation ever could. On the afternoons, when he came home, defeated from auditions that went nowhere, she didn't pry or preach. She simply made him tea the way he liked it, creamy and warm, and sat beside him until he was ready to speak. She reminded him that courage wasn't measured by success, but by the willingness to try. Again, he soaked in her words, even if he didn't respond. When he landed his first real acting opportunity, a moment that should have filled him with confidence, he felt almost unworthy of it. Lucia sensed this too. She told him that standing in front of a camera didn't make him special. What made him special was the heart he carried behind the camera, the sincerity he poured into every role, even roles most people ignored. She said the world didn't need perfect actors. It needed truthful ones. Her quiet faith steadied him whenever doubt tried to pull him under. By the time he became an adult, he understood what he had been given. Lucia hadn't just cared for him. She had shaped him. She had stitched resilience into him, thread by thread, without asking for recognition or repayment. She had offered him a foundation of love, sturdy enough to survive every loss he would one day face. And even then, he had no idea just how deeply her devotion had run. As Keanu's plane lifted into the sky, leaving Los Angeles behind, he felt the familiar heaviness settle into his chest, the weight of memories he had avoided for years. Lucia had been the constant thread through his childhood, the quiet guardian who had shaped him more than anyone. But fame, with its relentless momentum, had slowly pulled him away from her without him noticing when the drift truly began. It started subtly, the way most losses do. His teenage years blurred into long days at acting classes, part-time jobs, and auditions that tested his stamina more than his talent. Lucia still lived with them then, and she never missed his performances or milestones. But once he left home, once he stepped into the world on his own terms, the rhythm of their connection began to change. He remembered the first few years of his career, with sharp clarity. Vancouver film sets, cheap apartments, jobs that didn't pay much but fueled a dream. He called her then, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. They wrote letters too. She always ended hers with the same line, Con cariño, to Lulu. With affection, your Lulu. But then came the bigger films, the longer shoots, the travel, the exhaustion that wrapped around him like fog. One success led to another. Interviews poured in. Directors asked for meetings. Scripts arrived in stacks. His calendar filled with so many commitments that personal life grew smaller. Lucia never complained. When weeks passed between phone calls, she asked only if he was eating well. When months slipped by, she told him she was proud. When he missed her birthday one year because of a late-night shoot, she laughed softly and said she understood. She understood too much. He didn't realize then how the distance was forming, not just physical, but emotional. She had been his safe place, the foundation beneath his childhood, and he had spent his adult life running from anything that forced him to confront the wounds he thought he had buried. The loss of his father, the chaos of his upbringing, the loneliness he carried, like an invisible backpack, all of it lived close to her, and without meaning to, he pushed that closeness away. He sent gifts, thinking they made up for absence. He sent money, believing it showed gratitude. He bought her a small home in Michoacan, a white-walled casita with terracotta tiles and 2 mango trees in the yard. She cried when she received it. She told him he had already given her too much, but he didn't visit as often as he promised. Work took over. Grief took over. Life kept moving faster, demanding versions of him he didn't always recognize. Now, as he sat in a dark airplane cabin, the truth pressed down on him with growing clarity. He had stayed away because being near her reminded him of who he used to be, and he didn't know how to face that boy anymore. As the years passed, the distance between them grew quietly, almost invisibly. Not out of neglect, not out of indifference, but out of the strange way. Grief and success reshape a person without warning. When Keanu lost close friends, when heartbreak carved deep lines through his life, he found himself withdrawing. He isolated not because he wanted to, but because he didn't know any other way to survive the weight of loss. Lucia remained a gentle presence on the other side of that distance. She sent him birthday letters even when he forgot to reply. She mailed him small crocheted gifts, scarves, coasters, tiny embroidered birds, each stitched in the same warm colors of her childhood village. He'd open them between filming days, smile softly, and tuck them into drawers with the intention of calling her later. But later always came too late. He remembered one particular year when he was filming back-to-back projects consumed by the pace of work. He came across her voicemail by accident. Her voice, warm and patient as ever, said she didn't want anything big, just a hello, just to hear how he was doing. She said she was proud of him. She always said that. And then she ended the message the same way she ended everything. Te quiero mucho, mi niño. I love you very much, my boy. He saved the message, telling himself he would call her the next day. He didn't. The guilt of that still pressed against him like a bruise that never fully healed. When he finally bought her the small home in Michoacan, she resisted at first, saying it was too much, saying he needed his money more than she needed comfort. But he insisted. He wanted her to have something beautiful, something peaceful, something that could hold all the years she had given to him. He remembered the day she moved in. She sent him a photograph of herself standing in front of the house, hand on her heart, tears in her eyes. He looked at that picture now in his mind and felt a painful truth rise to the surface. He had given her a home, but he had taken away his presence. Success kept pushing him forward. Interviews, premieres, rehearsals, training, flights, constant motion. People praised him for his dedication, his work ethic, his intensity, but very few knew how much he was running from. Staying busy meant staying numb. Staying numb meant not having to look back, not having to face the parts of himself he hadn't healed. And Lucia, gentle, knowing, patient. Lucia was the only person who saw through him, without effort. Being near her brought back memories he hadn't processed, feelings he wasn't ready to face. She reminded him of the boy who cried in her lap, the boy who struggled, the boy who feared abandonment long before he had words for it. So he stayed away, not because he loved her less, but because loving her demanded he face the person he had once been. There were moments when he tried to visit, times when he packed a bag with the intention of flying to see her, only for a last-minute script change, reshoot, or meeting to pull him back into the current of work. Each time he postponed, she told him not to worry. She always said she understood. But her understanding only deepened the ache he carried. He didn't know then how much she waited for him. He didn't know she sat in her garden on quiet afternoons, looking toward the road as if expecting a familiar silhouette. Her niece once hinted that Lucia kept extra food in the kitchen just in case he came home hungry. He never heard that story until much later, when the truth no longer offered comfort, only regret. On nights when the world felt too heavy, he sometimes found himself dialing her number, listening to the ring, then hanging up before she answered. He didn't know what he feared more, hearing her voice or hearing the disappointment she would never admit. Distance had become a habit, and habits harden when left unchecked, but he still sent money. He still paid for her medical care, birthdays, repairs, holidays. He thought providing meant protecting. He thought giving meant staying connected. He didn't realize that Lucia never wanted the gifts. She wanted the boy she raised. She wanted the young man she believed in. She wanted the visits he kept promising and never made. Now, sitting in the dim airplane cabin, Keanu finally understood what he had done. He had loved her deeply, but from a distance, safe enough that it didn't stir the parts of him he didn't know how to face. And that distance had grown so wide that now the only way to cross it was by returning to her after she was already gone. The moment Keanu stepped off the plane in Morelia, the air felt different. Thicker, warmer, carrying a scent he hadn't smelled since childhood dust, citrus, wood smoke, and something faintly sweet that reminded him of Lucia's kitchen on winter evenings. He paused on the tarmac for a breath, letting the atmosphere settle around him like a memory waking up. He had traveled alone, something unusual for someone of his fame. No assistant, no security entourage, just a single carry-on bag, the letter from the lawyer folded carefully inside it. He didn't want distractions. He didn't want explanations. This journey wasn't one he could delegate. It was something he had to face with the same sincerity Lucia had shown him his whole life. The airport was small, with faded signs and quiet corners. A few people recognized him, whispering politely, not daring to approach. He appreciated the respect. In another circumstance, he might have smiled, but today there was a gravity inside him that left little room for conversation. A local driver met him outside, holding a handwritten sign with his name. The man looked to be in his late 60s, with sun-worn skin and kind eyes. "Senor Reeves?" he asked softly. When Keanu nodded, the man gave a reverent bow of his head. "Lucia was family to all of us. It is an honor to bring you." The drive to her village took over an hour, winding through rolling hills, covered in agave plants and red earth. Along the way, children played soccer in dusty fields. Farmers led donkeys down narrow paths. Life moved slowly here, deliberately, unlike the relentless pace he lived in Los Angeles. He watched out the window, letting the scenery wash over him. Every mile deeper into Michoacán felt like stepping closer to the heart of a story he had avoided for too long. He thought about the photograph she had sent him the day she moved into her little home. He pictured her standing proudly on the porch, smiling through tears. Probably telling her neighbors about her niño, who had given her a place to rest. After a long stretch of rural road, the village came into view. Small homes painted in soft colors, gardens full of marigolds and bougainvillea, chickens wandering along fences. Children ran barefoot in the street, their laughter echoing against clay walls. When the car passed, they stopped and stared, wide-eyed. Some whispered his name. Others pointed, but their parents touched their shoulders gently and told them to show respect. Everyone here seemed to know who he was. But more than that, they knew who Lucia had been. When the car stopped in the center of the village, an elderly woman selling fruit stepped forward. She placed a hand over her heart, tears gathering in her eyes. "You came," she whispered. "She always hoped you would." Keanu swallowed hard, unable to speak. He nodded, and the woman squeezed his hand before stepping aside. The lawyer's office was a small building on the corner, painted turquoise with a wooden door worn by decades of sun. As he approached it, the weight of everything he had yet to face settled deeper into his chest, and he reached for the door handle. The wooden door creaked softly when Keanu pushed it open. Inside, the office was quiet and cool, the thick adobe walls holding back the afternoon heat. A ceiling fan turned slowly above him, its rhythm steady and familiar, like the heartbeat of the building. Framed documents lined the walls, along with photographs of local festivals and community gatherings. It was simple, lived in, and unmistakably part of Lucia's world. A man rose from behind a desk near the back of the room. He was in his early 70s, tall and slender, with silver hair combed neatly to the side. His eyes, warm and observant, softened when they met Keanu's. He stepped forward with a solemn nod. "Señor Reeves," he said in accented English, "my name is Arturo Delgado. I was Lucia's attorney for many years." He paused, studying Keanu's face with a depth that told him this moment had been anticipated. "Thank you for coming." Keanu shook his hand gently. "She meant everything to me," he replied quietly. Arturo's expression deepened with empathy. "I know. She spoke of you often, even when her memory began to fade a little. Your name was always clear to her." The words struck him harder than he expected. He looked down, swallowing the ache rising in his throat. Arturo motioned for him to follow, leading him through a short hallway into a small conference room filled with afternoon sunlight. On the table rested a single object, a wooden chest. Old, worn, the surface etched with scratches from long use, but polished lovingly, as if cared for through the years. The brass hinges were darkened with age. A small lock held the lid closed. Next to it lay a sealed envelope, its edges yellowed. Keanu felt his breath hitch. Arturo spoke softly, almost reverently. "She brought this to me nearly 15 years ago. Said she wasn't ready to give it to you yet. Every few years, she added something new. She made me promise that when her time came, you would receive it with your own hands." A silence settled thickly between them. Keanu reached out, touching the top of the chest with the tips of his fingers. The wood was cool beneath his touch, and something inside him responded as if recognizing it. He didn't know why, but he felt a flicker of familiarity. Arturo watched him with patience, understanding that this moment carried weight words could not fill. "There is also a letter," he said, gesturing to the sealed envelope. "Her final message to you." Keanu stared at it. Lucia's handwriting curled across the front in careful script, the same handwriting that had filled the letters she used to send him. Seeing it again now stirred something deep within him. Grief, love, guilt, and a longing he couldn't name. Arturo lowered his gaze respectfully. She waited a long time to finish this. For a long moment, Keanu stood still, unable to move his hand from the chest. The room felt smaller now, filled with a quiet that pressed against him from all sides. He traced one of the scratches in the wood and wondered how many years it had been with her, how often she had touched it, how many memories she had locked inside. Arturo stepped back, giving him room. "Take your time," he said gently. "She wanted this to be yours when she could no longer say the words herself." Keanu nodded, though speaking felt impossible. He carefully lifted the envelope first. Lucia had sealed it with a small piece of red wax, just the way she used to seal her holiday letters years ago. The sight of it tightened his throat. He pressed the envelope against his chest for a moment before tucking it safely into his bag. He would read it when his heart was steady enough. Then he placed both hands on the chest. It felt heavier than its size should allow, as if it carried the weight of her entire life. Maybe it did. He lifted it slowly, holding it close, afraid it might break if he handled it any other way. "Would you like help carrying it?" Arturo asked. Keanu shook his head. "No, I'll carry it." Arturo smiled softly, the kind of smile that held understanding rather than pity. "She would be grateful you came," he said. "She spoke of you with such love." Keanu's eyes burned. "I should have come sooner." The older man placed a hand on his shoulder. "She never measured time the way we do. She only measured love, and you never lacked that." Keanu lowered his gaze, the chest held tightly in his arms. Then, carrying Lucia's final gift, he stepped out into the warm Mexican light. The guest house sat on the edge of the village, a small adobe building painted the color of faded marigolds. It smelled faintly of clay, warm air, and old wood. The owner, a grandmotherly woman with silver braids, had insisted on preparing tea for him before he settled in. She placed it on the table with a gentle pat on his arm and said she had known Lucia well. Everyone here had. That alone made his chest tighten. Once she left, the room grew still. A single window let in the soft evening light, coloring everything a warm gold. The wooden chest sat on the bed, untouched. Beside it, the sealed letter felt like it carried more gravity than everything else in the room combined. Keanu sat at the small table near the window, letting out a long, unsteady breath. He pulled the envelope from his bag and ran his thumb along the seal. The red wax cracked slightly under the heat of his touch. Lucia had always sealed things this way. A habit from her childhood. Something she said made letters feel more like gifts than messages. For a moment, he hesitated. Opening it felt like stepping into a moment he couldn't return from. Once he heard her voice again, he knew the grief would become real in a way it hadn't yet. But he also knew she wrote this for him. She had waited years to say these final words. He broke the seal. Inside was a thick sheet of stationery, slightly yellowed, and written in Lucia's familiar cursive. The handwriting wavered more than it used to. Letters tilted softly, as if leaning on him for support. He held the paper carefully, almost reverently, then began to read. Mi niño querido, it began. My dear boy. Just those 3 words were enough to make his chest tighten. She switched between Spanish and English the way she always had, weaving 2 languages together with a rhythm that belonged only to her. She wrote that she hoped he arrived safely, that she knew the journey was long, and that she was grateful he came. She apologized for not telling him sooner when her health began failing, saying she didn't want him to worry or feel obligated to rush across continents. You have given me more than enough in this life, she wrote. I did not need you to rush. I only needed you to live. He had to stop reading for a moment, pressing the paper gently against his forehead. Lucia had always been gentle, even in her goodbyes. When he continued, her tone shifted into that same warm humor she always used to lift him out of sadness. I know you are probably blaming yourself right now, she wrote. Stop it. You were always too hard on yourself. Even as a little boy, you carried more weight on your heart than any child should. Life gave you heavy things, my niño. You carried them with grace, even when you did not know you were strong. Her words felt like a soft hand on the back of his head, guiding him like she used to when he was small. Then she wrote something that made his breath catch. What I left for you is not money. It is not something to make life easier. It is something to remind you of who you are, in case the world ever made you forget. Keanu's fingers trembled slightly. He looked toward the chest on the bed. Lucia had always known what he needed long before he knew it himself. Keanu set the letter down for a moment, letting his eyes rest on the wooden chest across the room. The late sun had shifted, and now the beams of light touched the lid, making the worn wood glow softly. It looked almost alive in the warm light, as if carrying something that breathed with memory. He returned to the page. I know the world sees you as strong, Lucia wrote, but I have seen your quiet strength, the kind that never asks to be praised, the kind that holds others even when you feel empty. His throat tightened. She had always seen past everything he tried to hide. Even when he was young, even when he grew older and his life became too full of noise, she was the one who had always spoken to the small, frightened parts of him that he tried so hard to bury beneath responsibilities, expectations, and loss. You were always trying to protect people, she wrote. Sometimes even protecting them from your own sadness. But you don't have to hide sadness. Not from me, and not from yourself. He let out a long breath. The room suddenly felt heavier, quieter, more intimate. She continued by thanking him, but not for money or gifts. Instead, for the way he had listened to her stories when he was young, for the way he had treated her with respect even when he grew famous. For the drawings he used to make of her when he was a shy little boy. For the birthday card he once colored with markers because he couldn't afford a real one. "You gave me a family," she wrote. "I want you to understand that. I had none. But with you, I felt like I had a son." He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. The words pulled him back to small moments he had forgotten. Her sitting at the kitchen table peeling oranges. Her humming old Mexican lullabies. The way she would kiss the top of his head without thinking. He remembered how safe he felt, how whole. She wrote about her final years in the village, how peaceful they had been, how she spent her mornings tending to a small garden that reminded her of the plants she cared for when he was a child. She said neighbors would visit often, bringing stories of their children, and she would share stories of him. "Only the happy ones," she added with a small flourish in her handwriting. "I told them you were doing great things," she wrote. "Not because you were famous, but because I knew your heart." Then her words shifted again, becoming more deliberate. The ink grew slightly darker, as if she had pressed harder with each sentence. "What I left in the chest is something I began long ago. It is my way of keeping the parts of you that mattered to me most. You may open it when you are ready. No rush, no pressure, just your own heart." Keanu touched the corner of the letter, tracing the small smudges where her hand must have rested. The paper felt warm despite the cool air of the room. She ended the paragraph simply. "I hope it helps. You come home to yourself." He swallowed hard and picked up the letter again, bracing himself for what came next. The final portion of the letter felt different. The handwriting grew softer, the lines curving with a tenderness that felt like a whisper across time. Keanu could almost hear her voice as he read the last page. "I know life carried you far from me," she wrote. "Farther than I ever imagined, when you were that little boy sitting on the kitchen floor asking me if the moon had a heartbeat. But I always knew you would go far. You were born to move, to search, to give pieces of your heart to the world." Her words warmed him and wounded him all at once. "I never needed you to stay close. I only needed to know you were safe and kind. And you were. Even in your hardest years, I saw your kindness from far away." He paused, feeling the truth settle deep. "You have carried so much pain silently. I could feel it in your letters, even when you never said it. I wanted to hold you like I did when you were small. But life has its own roots and rivers. We follow where we must." Then came the line that made his breath falter. "What is in the chest is my memory of you. Not the actor, not the man the world sees, but the child who trusted me." And below it, one last message. "Open it when your heart is ready. I am with you, always." Keanu folded the letter slowly, holding it against his chest as the last light of evening settled around him. Lucia was gone, but her voice, her love, and her memories were here waiting for him in the wooden chest on the bed. The room had grown quiet enough for Keanu to hear the distant murmur of evening traffic drifting through the village streets. Yet inside the guest house, everything felt suspended. The letter rested beside him on the table, still warm from where he had held it against his chest. But now his eyes were drawn to the wooden chest lying on the bed, heavy with years he had not been there to witness. He rose slowly, as if moving too quickly might disturb something sacred. The wooden chest looked even smaller up close, its corners rounded from years of handling, its brass hinges dulled by time. He knelt beside the bed and placed both hands on the lid. The wood felt cool at first, then warmer as his palms absorbed the weight of the moment. Lucia had touched this chest countless times, packed pieces of herself into it. He could almost imagine her sitting at her small wooden table, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose, carefully writing something before tucking it inside. He inhaled, steadying himself, then lifted the lid. A soft breath escaped him. Inside, arranged with almost mathematical care, were journals, dozens of them. 35. By the look of it, though he did not count not yet. They were stacked neatly, tied with thin ribbons of faded fabric. Some were small enough to fit in one hand. Others were thick, nearly bursting from the pages inside. Their covers varied leather, fabric, cardboard, but all had been handled enough times for the edges to soften. Keanu reached for the first one on top. It was a small notebook bound in blue cloth, the corners frayed and the cover worn thin. When he held it, the book seemed to mold itself into his hands, as if it belonged there. His fingers trembled slightly as he untied the ribbon and opened to the first page. Mi niño Keanu. The entry began. His breath caught. Her handwriting, younger and steadier here, filled the page with graceful loops and careful lines. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were strong. She wrote about the first week she had moved into his family's apartment. He had been 3 years old, full of questions and unspent energy. She described how he would cling to her skirt while she cooked, demanding to know why onions made people cry and whether the moon could fall. He let out a soft laugh that cracked halfway through. He could almost see her writing it. The way she pushed her hair behind her ear when she concentrated. The way she bit the end of her pen when thinking. The way she always paused before writing something heartfelt, as though tasting the words first to make sure they were right. He turned the page. Each entry flowed like a memory, unfolding a documentary of his life, seen through her unwavering gaze. She wrote about his tantrums, his curiosity, his clumsy attempts to tie his shoes. She wrote about the mornings he woke from nightmares and ran straight to her room, burrowing into her arms until his breathing calmed. Sometimes, I think he feels too much, she wrote. He is small, but his heart is not. He closed the journal slowly, his thumb lingering on the edge of the page. 35 journals, 3 decades, all written to him. Lucia had been watching his life for years after he left, capturing pieces of him he never shared with anyone else. And he had never known. Keanu placed the first journal gently beside him on the bed and reached for the next. This one was thicker, with a faded red cover that looked as if it had once been vibrant. When he opened it, the entries had shifted in tone. He recognized the years instantly, the early teenage period when he had struggled to belong anywhere. Lucia wrote about how he wandered the apartment quietly, shoulders tense, pretending not to care about the kids who teased him for his dyslexia. She described how he would practice reading aloud late at night when he thought no one could hear. She wrote how her heart broke when she found him asleep over a book. Frustrated tears dried on his cheeks. You tried so hard to be strong, she wrote. But strength is not the absence of tears. It is the courage to keep trying the next day. He swallowed hard. He had forgotten that version of himself, the lonely boy who felt out of place, out of rhythm with the world. Lucia had been the only one who understood without needing explanations. He turned a few pages and froze when he reached the year he met River Phoenix. Lucia described how vibrant he became, how alive he looked when he talked about River's kindness, talent, and wild humor. She had noticed everything how River inspired him, how their friendship steadied parts of Keanu that had always felt uncertain. Then the entry shifted to the time after River's death. Her handwriting grew less steady. My heart aches for him, she wrote. He walks like a person carrying invisible stones. He smiles for others so they will not worry, but his eyes look far away, like he is searching for something he cannot name. Keanu closed his eyes, his chest tightening. He remembered those days vividly, the way grief hollowed him out. To see it through Lucia's eyes was like reopening a wound he had stitched shut years ago. He continued reading and soon reached the entries about Jennifer Syme. Lucia wrote about how gentle Jennifer was, how she brought a peace into Keanu's life that she had prayed he would find. And then, in the pages that followed, Lucia wrote about losing her too. I do not know how much one person can endure, she wrote, but I will keep writing, so he never walks alone in my eyes. Keanu pressed the journal to his chest. Lucia had carried all of his grief with him, silently, faithfully, for decades. He reached for another journal, this one bound in soft brown leather. The cover bore a faint imprint of a pressed flower, long crumbled away. When he opened it, he immediately recognized the years his early Hollywood days, when everything felt overwhelming. Lucia had followed each moment through articles, interviews, and the rare phone calls he managed to make. "You look tired in the photo I saw today," she wrote, "but you smiled anyway. You have always tried to protect the world from your exhaustion." He turned the page. "I pray that someone notices when you are hurting, even if you pretend you are fine." Keanu exhaled shakily. No one had understood him that well. Not then. Not even now. He moved on to the next journal, its pages thicker, the ink darker. These entries were from the years he had gone quiet, the years he worked constantly, burying himself in set after set. Lucia had written about trying to send letters, unsure if they reached him. She wrote about watching him from afar, studying every expression she could find in photos, searching for signs of joy or peace. "I see something changing in him," she wrote. "Something deeper than sadness. I think he is learning how to live again. Slowly, carefully, like a plant growing toward light." His chest tightened. She had seen his quiet rebuilding, even when he hadn't recognized it himself. Then he reached the final journal. It was different from the others. Thinner, newer. The handwriting inside was far more fragile. Each letter looked deliberate, shaped with effort. "These pages are for when I am gone," she wrote, "so you will remember that someone walked through life believing in you completely." He read slowly, absorbing every word. She wrote about her hopes for him, her pride in the man he had become, and her certainty that he was stronger than he ever allowed himself to believe. "You were never alone," she ended. "Not then, not now, not ever." Keanu closed the journal with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the enormity of her love. 35 journals. 35 years of watching him grow, hurt, heal, and rise again, all captured by the woman who had loved him long before the world ever knew his name. The journals lay, open across the bed like scattered windows, into a life he barely remembered. Keanu sat on the edge, one hand on the worn spine of the earliest notebook, its cover a faded yellow floral pattern, the kind Lucia favored when money was tight and choices were few. The fabric was frayed, softened by years of handling. When he lifted it, dust rose gently in the quiet air, the scent of old paper blending with the warm clay smell drifting in from the open window. He opened to the first page. "Mi niño was afraid of thunderstorms again." The entry began. "He crawled into my room and curled at my feet, just like a kitten. I pretended to sleep because it makes him brave when he thinks he is protecting me." A breath escaped him. He remembered thunderstorms, though only vaguely, the way the sky cracked open, the way the house trembled. He had always been embarrassed by how terrified he was of the sound, but he never knew she pretended to sleep. Never knew she shaped his fear into courage. So gently, he turned the page. Another entry described the morning he tried to make her breakfast. He would have been 4, maybe 5. Lucia wrote about waking to the smell of burned toast and his tiny face smeared with butter. She wrote that he had whispered, "I wanted you to rest because you always help me rest." His chest tightened. He had forgotten that day entirely. She had not. He flipped ahead, reaching the pages where he grew, into the shy boy who wanted answers to impossible questions. Lucia wrote about him sitting on the floor for hours with a flashlight, studying the torn pages of a second-hand astronomy book. She described how he stayed awake until dawn once, staring out the window as if the stars were calling to him. "He is always searching," she wrote, "not for places, for meaning, for belonging. I hope he finds them both." Keanu swallowed. She had always understood the way he looked at the world not as a place to conquer, but as something fragile and immense that he wanted to make sense of. He moved to the next journal. Its cover a simple black cardboard, now turning gray. These entries were from his early adolescence. Lucia wrote about the nights he came home frustrated from school, slamming his books down and insisting he was stupid. She wrote about how she would sit beside him quietly until he let the anger melt into tears. "He thinks he is not enough," she wrote, "but I see the way he studies people. I see the way he listens. One day, that heart will heal someone else's." He let out a long breath, the air shaking on its way out. Back then, he had never believed anyone could see anything good in him, least of all the enormous, aching softness he tried to hide. But she had seen it, always. Another entry caught his eye. He recognized the year immediately, the year he got his first job, a small theater gig that paid almost nothing. Lucia had written about the moment he told her. He remembered bursting into the kitchen, convinced he had messed up the audition, only to learn he'd been chosen after all. But in her journal, she described the moment differently. "He did not smile," she wrote. "He laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes from a place deeper than joy. It was relief. It was hope. It was a boy discovering he had a voice." Keanu pressed his thumb over that line. She always knew how to see the truth beneath his reactions. He continued reading. Lucia wrote about how she had stood in the audience during one of his earliest performances, watching him stumble nervously through his lines. She wrote she had never been more proud, not because of the performance itself, but because he was brave enough to try. "He believes acting is storytelling," she wrote, "but I think he wants to heal something inside himself, and maybe, one day, he will help others heal too." He closed the journal slowly, feeling its weight settle into his palms. She had understood him long before he ever understood himself. These books weren't just memories. They were proof that someone had carried him through every silent struggle, quietly, faithfully, lovingly. Keanu opened another journal, its green cloth cover soft from decades of handling. Inside, Lucia's handwriting stretched across the pages in long, gentle lines. These entries were from the years he transitioned into adulthood. Years when he was still uncertain, still shaping himself, still wrestling with doubts no one else ever saw. Lucia wrote about the late nights he spent sitting on the apartment balcony, staring at the sky long after everyone else was asleep. She described how he would return inside with a quiet determination, as if the stars had spoken to him. She said she believed he would one day follow those stars, not with machines or rockets, but by guiding hearts that needed light. "He does not understand his gift," she wrote. "He thinks his emotions make him weak, but one day they will be his greatest strength." He felt his chest tighten. All those nights he thought he was alone in the dark, she had been watching, understanding him in ways nobody else had. Another entry caught his attention. She described how he comforted a young neighbor who had lost her dog. Keanu had been barely 16, awkward and uncertain, but he had sat with the girl for hours, saying nothing, simply letting her cry. "He thinks he did nothing," Lucia wrote, "but he gave her what she needed most. He was present. That is a rare and beautiful gift." He closed the journal slowly, letting the words sink into him. Across 3 decades, page after page, she had seen him with extraordinary clarity, not as a future actor, not as a public figure, but as a boy growing into a man who felt deeply, cared quietly, and carried the world's heaviness with a gentle heart. Through her eyes, he finally remembered who he had always been. The night deepened around the guest house, but Keanu barely noticed. The journals had pulled him into a world where time folded in on itself, where his 20s were not something behind him but something happening right in front of him again. He reached for another book, this one a medium-sized notebook with a navy cover and a small rip along the spine. The date on the first page made his stomach tighten. It was the year he left home for good. Lucia's handwriting filled the paper, Today he left with one suitcase and eyes that tried to be brave, she wrote. He hugged me too quickly. I pretended not to notice that he did not want me to see his tears, but I saw them anyway. Keanu paused, feeling the words settle inside him. He remembered that day, but in fragments. The weight of his bag over his shoulder, the hollow echo of the apartment, the taste of fear and freedom mixing together. In his version of the memory, he had been almost stoic, determined, already halfway gone. In Lucia's version, he was still her boy, holding himself together just enough to keep from breaking. He read on. She thinks he is strong, Lucia wrote about his mother. The world thinks he is strong. I know he is tender. Tender is stronger than any kind of brave. The entries that followed traced the early years of his career with painful detail. She wrote about every small win she heard about from neighbors, cousins, anyone who brought back stories from Canada or sets where he worked. She collected scraps of newspaper articles and taped them into the pages, circling his name as if anchoring him there so he wouldn't drift away. He sends money when he can, she wrote in one entry. Small amounts at first, then more. He always writes that it is nothing. To me, it is not the money that matters. It is that he remembers. She noticed everything. The way he refused to talk about his accomplishments. The way he downplayed every praise. The way he never boasted. He does not know how unusual it is, she wrote. Most people want to be seen. He just wants to work and disappear. But kindness, like his, should not disappear. The world needs to see it, even if he does not. He turned the page and felt something inside him begin to crack open. The next entries followed him into his first real films. She wrote about hearing from a distant relative that he gave away part of his paycheck to a friend who was struggling. Another time, she heard he paid for a crew member's medical bill without anyone asking. Lucia wrote as if she were sitting in the back row of his life, watching him give pieces of himself away quietly wherever he went. I worry that he thinks he must always give, she wrote. Not because giving is wrong, but because I fear no one is pouring back into him. An empty cup still tries to offer water, but eventually it breaks. Beneath that line, in slightly darker ink, she had added a single sentence. If I could reach him now, I would tell him that his heart is not a tool, it is a treasure. Keanu turned to the next journal. Its page is softer, worn from being opened many times. The date aligned with the first years when his fame began to take shape, when interviews, travel, and film sets blurred into one long season. Lucia wrote as if she were standing at the edge of that whirlwind, watching it swallow him piece by piece. I see his smile in the interviews, she wrote. It is polite. It is practiced, but it is not real. His real smile lives somewhere quieter, somewhere the cameras do not know how to find. He paused, breathing slowly. Even through a television screen thousands of miles away, she could see the fatigue beneath his charm. The entries shifted to the times she heard he was alone during holidays, unable to travel home. Lucia wrote how she baked his favorite sweets anyway, placing them in a tin on her small kitchen table, pretending he might walk in and take one the way he used to. She wrote that she lit a candle for him every Christmas Eve and prayed he felt loved, even in silence. Then came the letters she never mailed. In one, she wrote, "You are living in a world that rewards cruelty, speed, and noise. Do not let it shape you. Kindness is not weakness. It is the rarest strength." In another, she warned him gently that fame had a way of hardening people not because they changed, but because the world kept pressing against their softest parts. She told him he must guard that softness, not bury it. "I worry," she added in a trembling script, "that one day he will begin to believe he must be cold to survive. But cold people forget how to feel joy, and joy is what he deserves most." Keanu felt tears rise again. He wiped them quietly, but they came faster when he reached the entries about the loneliness that accompanied his rising career. Lucia wrote about how she noticed a certain heaviness behind his eyes in photographs, a heaviness the world mistook for brooding charm. But she recognized instantly as ache. "I used to sit outside his room when he had nightmares," she wrote. "When he was older, I could no longer sit by his door. But I still felt the nightmares from here." He turned another page, and her tenderness only deepened. She wrote about watching him portray characters filled with sorrow and resilience. She wrote that she believed he channeled pieces of his own wounds into them, not for applause, but because he wanted others to feel understood. "He heals people without knowing," she wrote. "When they watch him, they feel less alone. He thinks he is just acting. He does not realize he is offering comfort." His breath shook. He pressed a hand to his eyes. Through every entry, Lucia had loved him in a way that asked for nothing and gave everything. She had seen his heart clearly, even when he had tried to hide it from himself. Keanu rested the latest journal on his lap, exhaling slowly as the weight of Lucia's words settled deeper into him. The night outside had grown still. A faint wind brushed the window, but inside the room there was only the sound of his breathing and the quiet pulse of memories he had not allowed himself to touch in years. He picked up another journal. This one was thinner, bound in soft brown paper that had curled at the edges from humidity and time. When he opened it, he noticed the handwriting had changed. The letters leaned more heavily to the right. The ink was darker in places, where Lucia had paused too long or pressed too hard. The year marked on the first page made him hesitate. It was one of the last years of her life. He smoothed the page gently and began to read. "Today I woke early," she wrote, "and I found myself thinking of him again. He must be busy. His life is full of noise and movement. I hope he is eating well. I hope someone is reminding him to rest." He paused, letting the tenderness of her concern wash over him. Then he turned the page. "I have one regret," she wrote, "just one, that he never let himself be truly loved." The words hit him harder than he expected. She had never spoken that aloud, not once, in all the years she cared for him. He felt his chest tighten as he read the line again, slower this time, as if hoping the meaning might change. But it didn't. She continued, her handwriting becoming even softer. "When he was small, he let me love him. He would curl into my arms without fear, without shame. He trusted love the way children do. But something in him changed when he got older. His heart learned to close itself, little by little, not because he stopped feeling, but because he felt too much." Keanu lowered his eyes. She was right. He had spent so much of his life protecting his own heart, hiding the deeper wounds behind polite smiles, humor, and silence. It had become easier to comfort others than to let anyone comfort him. Lucia had known. She always knew. He read on. "I wish he had visited," she wrote. "Not because I needed anything. Not money, not gifts, only him. I wanted him to come sit with me on the porch and let the world be quiet around us. I wanted him to see the village, to meet the people who prayed for him. I wanted to cook for him again, even if only once." Her regret was written simply, without bitterness or blame, only longing. "I know he thinks he was protecting me by staying away, but I did not need protection. I needed presence. I wanted him to let himself be loved without earning it." Keanu felt his throat close. He blinked hard, but the journal blurred anyway. He remembered all the times he meant to visit, all the times he told himself he would go when things slowed down, but things never slowed. And he let the years stack up between them, like bricks. Now those years were irreversible. He turned the page. Lucia had written about preparing a room in her home for him, a small room with a window, facing the mountains. She wrote about saving a blanket for him, hand-woven by her sister years ago. She wrote about practicing old lullabies in case he ever visited, and asked her to sing again, even though she knew he probably never would. She had hoped, deeply, quietly, endlessly. Keanu rested the journal on his chest and closed his eyes, feeling the ache of every missed moment pressing against his ribs. Lucia had never asked for anything. And yet she had only one regret. He had never come. Keanu opened the next page, and Lucia's handwriting had grown noticeably weaker. The lines wavered, as though her hand trembled with each stroke. Yet the emotion in her words remained steady, deeply rooted, unshakably warm. "I wanted to show him my garden," she wrote. "The one I planted so he would have a peaceful place if he ever came. I planted jasmine because it reminds me of the scent he carried as a boy after playing outside. I planted marigolds so the colors would make him smile." He pictured her tending that garden alone, brushing soil from her hands, looking toward the road each evening with quiet hope. The thought tightened something in his chest. He wondered how many sunsets she had watched while imagining he might appear at the gate, offering that shy, gentle smile she loved so much. She wrote about preparing recipes she thought he might still remember. The tamales she used to make when he was sick, the cinnamon atole she gave him on cold mornings. She saved the recipes in a small wooden box, waiting for a day he never managed to give her. "I wanted to hear his voice again," she continued. "Not through a television or a stranger's story. I wanted to hear him say my name. That would have been enough." Keanu felt his eyes burn. He pressed his palm against the page, as if trying to bridge the years between them through touch alone. The final entries in that journal grew even shorter, as though she wrote in pauses between her breaths. But each sentence carried the same unwavering affection. "I know he loved me," she wrote. "He just did not know how to show it anymore. It is not his fault. The world took too much from him, too young. I only wish he understood that he never needed to earn my love." Another page. "If he ever reads this, I hope he forgives himself. I was never disappointed, only hopeful." And then, the last line in the journal, written with barely any pressure at all. "My regret is not that he didn't come. My regret is that he never believed he was worth coming home to." And now he carried it too. The morning light settled gently over Lucia's village, soft and golden, warming the tiled rooftops and stirring the quiet hum of waking birds. Keanu stepped out of the guest house with the wooden chest still heavy in his arms, though he now carried its weight differently. The journals had changed something inside him, opened a door he didn't realize he had closed years ago. Lucia's niece, Isabel, met him outside the gate. She was a woman in her 50s, with the same gentle eyes Lucia once had. She greeted him with a respectful nod and motioned for him to follow her down a narrow stone path between homes. Their steps echoed softly as they walked. "She would be so happy you came," Isabel said quietly. "She talked about you every week. She loved you like a mother loves her son." He could only nod. Words felt too fragile to use. They reached Lucia's small adobe house. The garden behind it was enclosed by a low stone wall covered in vines. Isabel opened the gate for him and stepped back, letting him walk through alone. The moment he crossed the threshold, he felt a hush fall over him, gentle, reverent, as though the air itself remembered her presence. Lucia's garden was simple but full of life. Rows of marigolds glowed in bright orange clusters. Jasmine flowers clung to trellises, releasing a soft fragrance that drifted through the air. There was a wooden bench by the far wall where she must have sat every evening. She loved this place, Isabel said from the doorway. She said the garden made her feel close to him. Keanu moved slowly down the path, fingertips brushing leaves and blossoms. He could almost see her here, humming, pruning plants, looking toward the road. He imagined her waiting for him, even when she knew he might never come. Every sunset, Isabel said softly, she would sit right there on the bench. She always hummed the same tune. Keanu turned slightly. "A tune? She said you loved it when you were little." Sometimes she couldn't remember all the words, so she just hummed. But she never missed a sunset. He searched his memory, but nothing surfaced. A tune? A lullaby? His childhood had become a blur of sounds and feelings. many of them buried under years of grief.
"I don't remember,"
he whispered.
"That's all right,"
Isabel said. Memories come when they want to. He walked deeper into the garden, taking in the colors, the gentle warmth, the way the sunlight filtered between the fruit trees. Then he heard something, a sound so faint he thought it might be the breeze at first. A voice, a child's voice, a soft, lilting hum drifting from behind one of the small mango trees. Isabel's eyes brightened. "That must be Maria," she said. Lucia taught her the song. She said it should not disappear. Keanu moved toward the sound slowly, as if each step pulled him deeper into a long-forgotten part of himself. When he rounded the tree, he saw her, a little girl, no older than 9, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, braiding flowers together. She hummed the tune without noticing him, and then he froze. It hit him like a flood. The melody, familiar, heartbreaking, gentle. It was the lullaby Lucia sang the night his childhood dog, Shiro, died. The night he sobbed until he could barely breathe. The night she held him until sleep crept in and sorrow loosened its grip. The memory burst through him so sharply, his knees weakened, and then they gave out. He sank to the ground, breath trembling. The little girl finally looked up. "Signor, are you okay?" But he couldn't speak. The lullaby had opened something inside him that had been locked away for decades. The little girl stood slowly, unsure whether to approach him. Keanu kept his hands on the dirt, grounding himself as the melody circled his mind like a thread pulling him backward through time. He hadn't heard that song in decades, yet every note stirred something raw and long silenced. Maria took a cautious step closer. "My tia Lucia said this was your song," she said softly. "She taught it to me so someone would remember it if you ever came back." He lifted his eyes. The child's innocence, her small hands still stained with flower pollen, reflected everything Lucia had once given him: warmth, patience, a place to land when life felt too heavy. "Did she sing it often?" he managed. Maria nodded. "Every day. She said it reminded her of you. She said you used to cry when she didn't sing it." The girl smiled. "I think you must have loved her very much." Keanu swallowed hard. "I did. More than I knew how to say." She sat beside him without fear, as though sensing his silence needed gentleness more than distance. "Sometimes people forget things when they get big," she said. "But songs, remember." He let her words settle. They felt truer than anything he had heard in a long time. Isabel walked over quietly, carrying a small folded blanket. She placed it over his shoulders, the way Lucia once had during cold nights. "She would sit here," Isabel said, touching the bench, "and hum that tune while thinking of you. She said the song helped her keep you close." Keanu looked around the garden again. Every flower, every handmade trellis, every stone felt like a piece of her, placed with intention, tended with love. He imagined her sitting here alone, humming softly into the dusk, singing for a boy who had long since grown and gone. "It sounds just like she used to sing it," he whispered. Maria beamed. "She said the melody was supposed to make hurt feel smaller." He closed his eyes. The garden was silent now except for the breeze rustling through jasmine, and the fragile echoes of the lullaby still lingering in his mind. For the first time in years, he let himself feel everything the song carried: grief, love, regret, and the tenderness of a woman who had once held a broken 10-year-old boy in her arms, until he could breathe again. In this small garden, surrounded by the life she'd nurtured, Keanu finally remembered that version of himself. And for a moment, he let the child in him be held once more. The sun had begun to set by the time Keanu returned to the guest house. The journals lay in a careful stack on the bed, each one carrying a lifetime of memories he had never expected to encounter again. His body felt heavy, not from fatigue, but from the emotional depth of the day. He sat on the edge of the mattress and let his hands rest on the top journal, unsure whether he was prepared to read more. Yet something inside him whispered that there was still more Lucia wanted him to see. He opened a journal at random, one from the middle of the stack. The cover was soft with age, its edges rounded and warm. As he turned the pages, he recognized the years his early childhood, the time when the world felt both too big and too small all at once. Lucia's handwriting flowed across the pages in calm, steady strokes. She described his curiosity, his fears, his endless questions. She wrote about moments he had long forgotten. The time he tried to make her soup without knowing how to work the stove. The time he collected every leaf in the yard because he wanted to save autumn before it ran away. He smiled weakly at that. He had been a strange, sensitive child. Lucia always said his heart was larger than he knew what to do with. But then something slipped from between two pages and fluttered softly onto the blanket beside him. A folded sheet of paper, crinkled, yellowed, edges softened by years of being pressed flat. He froze, staring at it, as if it were something sacred. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, unfolding it with care. Inside was a drawing, crayon strokes in uneven lines, a tree with lopsided leaves, a sun drawn too large, with rays stretching across the whole paper, and under that sun, two figures, a child and a woman, stick figures, smiling, holding hands. The child had 3 strands of hair drawn in blue. The woman had red circles for cheeks. Above them, written in shaky 5-year-old handwriting, "I love you, Lulu." His breath caught. A small, broken sound escaped before he could stop it. He remembered this. He remembered giving it to her. It had been the day he tried to run away from home. He couldn't remember why he wanted to go, something about feeling unwanted, invisible, lost in the chaos of a life he didn't understand. But he remembered packing a small bag with an apple, a blanket, and his favorite toy car. He had made it only down the street before Lucia found him sitting on the curb, shoulders shaking. He remembered her kneeling in front of him, cupping his face in her hands, and saying he wasn't alone, not ever. That he didn't need to run, because she would always stay with him. He remembered sobbing into her chest. And later that night, drawing this picture, because she had told him the world would always feel safer if he remembered who loved him. She had kept it for over 40 years, pressed like gold between journal pages. He ran his thumb gently over the wrinkled crayon sun. The colors had faded, but the message remained simple, earnest, unconditional. A love he had given without hesitation. A love she had guarded her whole life. Keanu held the drawing against his chest, the paper crackling softly as it pressed over his heartbeat. The room around him blurred, its shapes fading into the background as emotion surged through him with sudden force. The weight of the day, the journals, the lullaby, the regrets, everything collapsed into this single sheet of crayon and childhood innocence. He lowered his head and let the tears fall freely. Not the quiet tears he had grown used to releasing in private moments. These were deeper, raw, the kind that emptied years of held breath. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gripping the drawing as if it might disappear if he let go. His shoulders shook with a childlike intensity he hadn't felt since he was young. It wasn't grief alone. It was recognition. It was memory. It was love, returning home. As he wiped his face with the back of his hand, he studied the drawing again. The details were so simple, yet so full of meaning. The 3 strands of blue hair he had given himself, the oversized hands he drew for Lucia, because she always seemed capable of holding the whole world. The red cheeks she earned because he remembered she smiled even when she was tired. He wondered what she felt when she tucked this drawing away for the first time, whether she pressed it between the pages with trembling fingers, hoping one day he would see how much it meant to her. Whether she imagined him opening it like this, grown, worn by life, finally ready to understand the love she carried for him. He gently folded the drawing along its original crease lines and slipped it back into the journal. He rested his hand on the cover as if sealing a promise. "She kept every part of me," he whispered. He reached for another journal, unable to stop himself now. Each one felt like a piece of a puzzle he didn't know he had lost. As he turned the pages, he found small mementos tucked inside. A movie ticket stub from a film he had mentioned liking when he was 13. A dried flower he had once given her without remembering. A scrap of newspaper showing his first interview when he was barely 20. She had kept fragments of him the way other people kept treasure. Keanu leaned back against the pillows, staring up at the wooden beams above him. The air felt heavier now, rich with the knowledge of everything Lucia had tried to preserve. Not for nostalgia, not for drama, but to remind him, someday, of the boy he once was, the boy she believed in. He closed his eyes and let the memory of her soft voice wash over him. The lullabies, the comfort, the laughter. It all lived here, between these pages, waiting for the moment he would return. He opened his eyes and whispered into the quiet room, "I love you too, Lulu." For the first time in decades, the words didn't hurt, they healed. The hour had grown late, but Keanu couldn't bring himself to stop. The journals were no longer just objects. They felt like a living conversation with Lucia. One he hadn't realized he needed. One he wasn't ready to end. The lamplight softened the room into warm gold as he reached for the last journal in the chest. It looked different from the rest. The cover was a deep brown, worn smooth at the edges, but newer than the older books. The corners were less frayed, the binding stronger. Inside, the pages were filled with writing that slanted downward, the way a hand does when it grows tired. The ink was darker in some places, lighter in others, as though her strength flickered while she wrote. The date on the first entry made him pause. Just weeks before she passed. He sat up straighter, the air tightening around him as he began to read. "Mi niño," she wrote. "If you are reading this, then it means my time has reached its quiet end. I hope you found your way here, with peace, in your heart." He swallowed hard. The tenderness in her words felt almost physical, like a hand on his cheek. She continued, "You were always more than what you gave. People saw your kindness and thought it came from pain, but that is not true. Your kindness came from love. You were love, not just loved. I wish I had told you that sooner." He closed his eyes briefly, letting the sentence anchor itself inside him. No one had ever said it quite like that. Not with such certainty. Not with such faith. When he turned the page, her writing had grown smaller, as if the effort to hold the pen had become heavier. "I watched you from afar for many years. I saw how you gave your heart to the world, even when the world took too much. You always tried to protect others from their storms. But mi niño, who protected you?" The question cut through him like a blade. He rested a hand on the page, wishing he could answer her. Wishing he could tell her that he hadn't realized how alone he felt until now. On the next page, she wrote of her one wish. "I want you to see yourself the way I saw you. Enough. Whole. Not for the roles you played, or the kindness you offered, but because of who you were when no one watched. The child who dreamed by the window. The teenager who stayed up to help me fold laundry. The man who still gives quietly. You were always enough." His breath trembled. He felt the room close in, soft but intense, as if the walls held their own memory of her. He kept reading. "I worried that life taught you love must be earned. But love is not payment. Love is not proof of worth. Love is simply what you deserved." Her writing trailed in places, growing thinner. Then came the line that froze him. "Return to the boy who dreamed by the window. He is still there, waiting." The sentence echoed inside him, with a depth that made him shut the journal for a moment, just to steady his breath. The boy by the window. He remembered him. A quiet child staring out at a world he hoped would understand him someday. A child Lucia understood first. Keanu opened the journal again with slow, careful hands. The final entries felt different from the earlier ones. Not merely reflections, but farewells, shaped with love sharp enough to wound and soft enough to heal. "I hope you forgive me for leaving without seeing you again," she wrote. "But I knew you were carrying too much, and I did not want to become another weight. Instead, I wanted to leave you something lighter, a way home to yourself." He traced those words with his thumb, feeling their warmth, even through paper that had grown thin with time. Lucia had always known what he needed, long before he did. "In my last days, I thought of our mornings together," she wrote. "You sitting on the counter, swinging your feet while I cooked. You asking questions about the world with those big eyes that wanted to understand everything. You trusted life then. You trusted goodness. I pray that trust returns to you." He felt something inside him loosen. She wasn't just telling him goodbye. She was reminding him of a version of himself he had abandoned, a version she believed still existed beneath the layers of loss and responsibility. The next page held shorter sentences, each one more fragile than the last. "You were my greatest joy. You were my purpose in this world. You were my blessing." He blinked slowly, letting each truth settle like a stone dropped gently into water. These weren't words meant to comfort out of obligation. They were declarations she had waited decades to speak, waiting until she knew he would be ready to hear them. He turned to the final entry. "There is nothing I need from you now, mi niño. No apology, no sadness. Only this: live with a lighter heart. Know that you gave me a beautiful life. Know that I left this world with peace because you existed in it." His vision blurred again, and he pressed the journal to his chest as though it were the last warm piece of her he could hold. He breathed in slowly, feeling the ache rise, crest, and soften. At the very bottom of the final page, written in letters small and shaky, was the quote she chose to leave him with. "Return to the boy who dreamed by the window. He is still there, waiting." Keanu closed the journal gently. The room felt still, as if even the air understood the significance of her last words. He sat for a long moment, absorbing the truth she had spent a lifetime trying to show him. He wasn't broken. He wasn't incomplete. He was simply human. And Lucia had loved every part of him. The next morning, Keanu woke to the sound of distant church bells and the low hum of village life beginning its daily rhythm. Chickens scratched in nearby yards. A vendor called out greetings as he rolled his cart of fresh fruit down the cobblestone street. Life here moved gently, unhurried, as if time itself breathed differently. He stepped outside and let the warmth settle against his skin. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the urge to rush anywhere. There were no meetings waiting for him, no cameras, no pressure to perform. Only the quiet reminder that he was standing in the place Lucia had chosen to spend her final years, a place shaped by simple joys and deep roots. He stayed in the village for a week, not because he needed more time to gather his things, but because something in him refused to leave. Each day felt like stepping into a memory he had never lived, but somehow already belonged to. Isabel welcomed him as though he were family, guiding him through the routines and corners of the town that Lucia had loved. On the second morning, she took him to the small market square. Wooden stalls were arranged beneath woven canopies, sheltering baskets of produce and handmade goods. The colors were vibrant, deep reds of chilies, soft greens of herbs, bright yellows of mangoes warmed by the sun. The air carried the scent of roasted corn and spices. This was her favorite place, Isabel said with a soft smile. She knew everyone here. As they walked, Vendors greeted Keanu with gentle nods and shy smiles. Some approached to tell him how kind Lucia had been. Others simply touched his arm and whispered blessings. He felt humbled by their sincerity. Lucia had left an imprint on this place, not through fame or fortune, but through kindness woven into everyday life. Keanu bought armfuls of fresh ingredients not because he needed them, but because he wanted to follow her footsteps. Weeks earlier, he never would have imagined himself standing barefoot in a village market, choosing tomatoes and cilantro while a warm breeze rustled through rows of hanging peppers. Yet here he was, moving slowly, absorbing everything around him. Later that afternoon, he joined a group of local women in an outdoor kitchen behind Isabel's home. They laughed as they worked, grinding spices, chopping vegetables, kneading dough between their palms. He watched their easy camaraderie, the way they passed bowls and stories back and forth as if both were meant to be shared. When he attempted to shape tamales, the women burst into playful laughter. One of them, Rosa, guided his hands gently. "Like this," she said. Lucia always rolled them tighter. She said it kept the flavor inside. He felt a tug in his chest. To know Lucia through their memories was a gift he had never expected. Each story painted her more fully, not just the woman who raised him, but the woman who brought comfort to her community, the woman who quietly shaped lives with her presence. When the meal was finally ready, they gathered around a long wooden table shaded by a grapevine canopy. Children ran past with bare feet, and music drifted from a nearby house. As Keanu took his first bite, the flavors warm, earthy, gentle, felt achingly familiar. He closed his eyes. Lucia's cooking lived here, in these hands, in these ingredients, in this laughter. He opened his eyes and looked around him. For the first time, he understood something he hadn't been able to name. Lucia had not simply loved him. She had rooted herself in this village the same way she once rooted him in her arms. And in doing so, she had given him a second home he never knew he needed. As the days passed, Keanu found himself settling into a rhythm he didn't know he had been craving. Each morning, he walked the same path Lucia used to take, past the bakery with its warm scent of sweet bread and down the lane lined with bougainvillea. He greeted neighbors by name, learning their stories the way Lucia once had. They spoke of her not as a caretaker, but as a friend, a counselor, a quiet light woven into the fabric of their daily lives. One afternoon, Isabel led him to the small school where Lucia had volunteered. The building was simple, painted in cheerful colors with hand-drawn murals along the walls. Children ran across the courtyard with boundless energy, laughter echoing into the open sky. Keanu watched them for a moment, feeling something inside him ease. She donated her time, Isabel said, but she always dreamed the children could have better books, better supplies. Without hesitation, Keanu approached the principal and offered support quietly, anonymously, without ceremony. He asked what the school needed most and made arrangements for everything to be delivered in Lucia's name. He didn't want credit. He wanted continuation, a way for her kindness to keep moving, long after she was gone. Later that evening, he returned to the garden behind her home. He carried a pot of jasmine he had purchased in the market and planted it near the bench where she used to sit. As he pressed the soil around its base, he felt the soft breeze move through the leaves, as if in acknowledgement. He realized then that Lucia had never asked him to live bigger. She had never pushed him toward fame or success. Instead, she had quietly taught him a different kind of living one, made of small acts, gentle moments, and deep connection. Roots, not noise. Presence, not speed. As the sun dipped below the mountains and the sky warmed into soft orange, he bowed his head and whispered a promise into the settling dusk. "I'll live differently now. Not faster, but deeper. Not larger, but truer. I understand that now." The garden held his words like an embrace. For the first time since arriving, he felt not like a visitor, but like someone finally coming home. On his final morning in the village, Keanu returned to Lucia's home one last time. The quiet adobe walls felt different now, warmer somehow, as though the memories he had uncovered in the past days had breathed life back into the tiny room she once filled. He stepped inside slowly, letting his fingertips trace the simple wooden frame of the doorway. The air carried a faint scent of lavender and old books, a smell that reminded him instantly of Lucia's steady presence. He walked through each room with deliberate steps, absorbing every detail: the delicate embroidered curtains, the tiny clay cups arranged neatly on her shelf, the cross above her bed, the stack of neatly folded blankets she had likely kept ready for guests. Though she lived modestly, everything around him was cared for with tenderness. Nothing was random. Everything had been chosen with intention. Eventually, he reached her bedroom. Morning light spilled through the window, warming the woven rug beneath his feet. He sat on the edge of her bed, letting the silence settle around him. It felt sacred to be here. He looked at the nightstand beside the bed, noticing its surface was smooth from years of her resting her hand there as she rose each morning. He hesitated, then gently opened the drawer. Inside was a small cloth pouch, simple, worn, tied with a faded piece of blue ribbon. Keanu felt his breath slow as he lifted it from the drawer. The fabric was soft between his fingers, almost fragile. He loosened the ribbon and tipped the contents into his palm. A wooden carving slid out. A dove, but only half of one. His heart clenched instantly. He recognized it before his mind fully caught up. He had seen this shape before, held it, cherished it, nearly lost it several times over the years. The other half lived in a box in his home in Los Angeles, tucked among the few personal keepsakes he had never parted with. A memory rose sharply, vivid as though it had happened yesterday. He was 19, preparing to leave home for his first film shoot. Nervous, excited, terrified he would fail. Lucia had walked him to the door with a steady smile. She pressed something into his hand, a small wooden shape wrapped in a cloth. "This is for you," she had said. "The other half stays with me." He remembered opening it and laughing softly. "It's a bird?" he asked. "A dove," she said proudly. "But only half. When you come home, you bring your half. Together, they will fly." He hadn't understood it then. Not fully, but he kept it anyway. Through cheap apartments, cramped rentals, and hotel rooms, it stayed with him. A small piece of carved wood that reminded him of something gentle and grounding. Now, sitting in her room decades later, he held the matching piece in his palm. He turned it over carefully. On the underside, carved in Lucia's familiar lettering, was a simple message. "Vuela libre, mi niño." Fly free, my child. The words pressed into him with the force of a lifetime's worth of love. Keanu held the carved piece carefully, almost afraid that gripping it too tightly might erase the warmth still lingering from Lucia's hands. The wood felt smoother than he remembered. Time had softened its edges, the same way time had softened so much of what she once carried. He lifted the small dove piece closer, studying the curves, the tiny carved feathers, the way the grain of the wood seemed to flow like gentle movement. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own half. He had brought it with him, instinctively slipping it inside before boarding the plane to Mexico. It felt heavier now, charged with new meaning. The piece he'd carried for years was rougher, less polished, the lines carved in younger hands. Together, the two halves looked like they had lived separate lives, yet belonged together unmistakably. He pressed them close. The pieces fit perfectly, not with resistance, not with force, but with the quiet certainty of something returning home. The complete dove rested across both palms, wings outstretched, the carved body finally whole. Its shape, once fragmented, now revealed its purpose. A bird in flight, free, open, unbound. Keanu felt the meaning settle into him like warm sunlight. She had always believed he was meant to be free. Free from fear. Free from guilt. Free from the weight he carried long after his childhood ended. She had known he stayed grounded too often, holding himself back out of duty or sorrow. But she had also known he had wings, even if he forgot how to use them. He turned the dove over and traced the engraving with his thumb. Vuela libre, mi niño. Fly free, my child. Not fly better. Not fly higher. Just fly. Just allow himself to move through life without chains made of old regrets. Just allow himself to be whole. A tremor moved through him. He closed his eyes, letting the message sink into the deepest part of him. For a long moment, he didn't move. The quiet of the room, the soft rustle of curtains in the breeze, the echo of Lucia's voice in memory. All of it wrapped around him like a final embrace. He pressed the dove gently to his chest. Something inside him, something that had been tight for decades, finally exhaled. Not in sorrow, in release. He understood now why she kept her half all these years. It wasn't to wait for his return. It was to remind him that no matter how far he traveled, no matter what the world demanded, a part of him was always meant to come back to himself. He opened his eyes and looked around her small room, taking in every detail one last time. Then he slipped both pieces of the dove into the cloth pouch, tying the faded ribbon with steady hands. He stood, feeling lighter than he had in a very long while. For the first time, he wasn't holding on to the past. He was carrying it with him, whole and free. When Keanu returned to Los Angeles, the city felt different. The noise of traffic, the shimmer of billboards, the endless rush of people, all of it seemed distant, as though he were witnessing a world he used to belong to, but no longer fit quite the same way. He carried Lucia's journals in his backpack the entire flight home, holding the weight of them against his chest as he drifted in and out of sleep. Every time he opened his eyes, the plane window reflected a quieter version of him, someone stripped of hurry, someone softened by remembrance. The first thing he did when he arrived home was walk into his writing room. It was the calmest space in his house, filled with books, scattered notes, and an old wooden desk that overlooked the garden behind his home. He placed the journals gently on the desk, smoothing the top one, as if tucking Lucia in for the night. For a long moment, he simply stood there, letting the silence settle around him. The room felt more grounded now, warmer, as though the spirit of Lucia herself had taken a seat beside his books. In the following days, he developed a new ritual. Each morning, before the world intruded with emails and calls, he brewed a quiet cup of tea and sat at his desk. He opened one journal at random and read a few pages. Not many, just enough to let her voice guide the rest of his day. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he paused and let his eyes drift toward the sunlight filtering through the window. And sometimes, when her words hit wounds he hadn't known were still open, he simply breathed. He found himself speaking her name more often too. In interviews, when asked about the influences in his life, he no longer hesitated. He told stories, soft ones, honest ones about Lucia. Not as a nanny, not as an employee, but as the woman who saved him from loneliness, who shaped him with patience, who saw him clearly when the world blurred him into a caricature. He described her as his guardian, his moral compass, his reflection. People listened. Some cried. Many wrote to him afterward, sharing stories of their own. Immigrant caregivers, the quiet figures who held their families together with love that wasn't always recognized. Keanu read those messages slowly, recognizing pieces of Lucia in each one. As the weeks passed, he knew he wanted to do more than tell stories. Her love had lived quietly for so long. Now it deserved a legacy of its own. He met with legal advisors, community organizers, and immigrant support groups. He outlined a foundation in Lucia's name, a fund dedicated to supporting immigrant caregivers across the United States. Not just financially, but emotionally. Training programs, legal aid, emergency grants, opportunities for education. A network that uplifted the very people who often uplifted everyone else without recognition. He called it the Lucia Foundation for Caregivers. When he signed the paperwork, he felt something in his chest steady. It wasn't closure. It was continuation. Her love would not end with her. Later, when he stood in his backyard at dusk, he thought of her garden in Mexico. He thought of jasmine vines, marigolds, and the lullaby drifting through warm evening air. He whispered a quiet promise into the sky, letting the fading light carry it wherever it needed to go. I'll live the way you taught me. Not faster, not bigger, just truer. Every year after that, on Lucia's birthday, he returned to her village. No press, no announcements, no entourage. He visited her home, tended her garden, donated anonymously to the school, and sat on her bench as the sun slipped behind the mountains. The villagers welcomed him like family, and for a few peaceful days each year, he stepped out of the world's glare and into the simple, rooted life she had cherished. He realized something profound. Each time he returned, her love hadn't just raised him, it had rescued him. And in the end, what he discovered in her journals wasn't only her legacy, it was the foundation of his own. In the months that followed, the presence of Lucia's journals continued to shape Keanu's days in ways both subtle and profound. He found himself moving slower, noticing details he once rushed past: a neighbor waving from a driveway, a bird perched on his balcony in the morning light, the warmth of a stranger's smile at a cafe. He realized Lucia had always lived this way, attuned to life's quiet signals, trusting that small beauties could steady even the heaviest heart. One morning, while rereading a journal entry from his teenage years, he paused at a sentence she had written after he confessed he didn't think he would ever amount to anything. She wrote that worth was not measured in fame or achievement, but in how gently a person carried their soul. He closed the journal and let the words rest against him. They felt like a hand on his shoulder, a reminder he had needed for far too long. As he returned to work, his colleagues noticed a shift in him. He was still dedicated, still disciplined, still pushing for excellence. But now there was a softness there, a patience that hadn't existed before. He took time to listen more. He took breaks he used to skip. He spoke with a clearer sense of gratitude. And in quiet moments, he shared Lucia's teachings with others on set, offering her wisdom the way she had once offered it to him. When he launched the Lucia Foundation publicly, messages poured in from around the world. Caregivers, immigrants, teachers, single parents and families wrote about the people who had held them together during their most fragile years. Keanu read their stories with reverence, seeing Lucia's reflection in many of them. Her love, once contained to a small home and a handful of journals, was now touching lives she had never imagined. And with each story he read, he felt more certain that honoring her legacy meant living differently, not by chasing the next milestone, but by carrying the quiet, enduring love she had given him into every corner of his life.